You actually were one of the first people really calling attention to the fact that wrestlers in the WWF are not employees, they're independent contractors, and you were trying to actually unionize wrestlers back in 1984. What was it that caused you to go out and try to start that union?
Well, what caused me to try it was the fact that at the time I was then leading a double life. I had Barry Bloom was my agent in Hollywood, and so I had a double career going. I was wrestling to maintain money for my family and all that, while at the same time I was pursuing an acting career or whatever LA had to offer. And when I did some stuff out there, like the first thing I did was Hunter, the television show with Fred Dreyer, the old football player. I did an episode of that. And then, of course, the second thing I did was Predator. And that kind of shot me to the top momentarily in the Hollywood world. And I noticed that I would get royalties from everything I do out in California on TV, that I'd get paid when they'd get replayed or I'd get money. And yet with Vince, he was doing all these videotapes and he's making a fortune in this sideline market and we're getting nothing. And I'm sitting there going, this isn't right. You know, and so, and then what it led up to, I kept getting more politically involved in it, and then one day we were out in Las Vegas doing something, and I got on the elevator in the hotel, and happened to get on at the same time was Gene Upshaw, the former Oakland Raider guard, football player.
Right.
And Big Gene got me up the elevator, and he looked right over at me and pointed that big black finger of his at me, and he says, you boys need to unionize. And I looked at Gene and I said, you're damn right we need to. Because here was the other thing. At that time, and this is way back in the 80s, I was paying $5,000 a year for health insurance for me and my family. And I thought to myself, well, if we could buy in numbers in a union, heck, I may only have to pay $1,500 a year. You know, because there's strength in amount, you know. And so I looked at that. Plus, I had come up in wrestling and seen all these old-timers for 25, 30 years in the business. And when the business was done with them, they, excuse my French, but they didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. And I thought, you know, if there was a union, and plus when I did Predator, I became a member of the Screen Actors Guild, so I had my union then. That's why I didn't bother to go after it anymore. When I came home from Predator, I had my union, retirement, health care, everything, through the Screen Actors Guild. Anyway, that aside, and I thought, why can't wrestlers have this? So that you know, maybe you could get rich, but I mean, if a wrestler could get $500 a month after he put 20 years, 25 years in the business and he gets to 60, it's like Roddy Piper said right before he died. He said, what am I going to do? He said, I got my retirement, but I can't get it till I'm 65. And Roddy said, I ain't going to make it to 65. And he was right. He didn't. So you got all this going on in wrestling, and they call you an independent contractor. That in itself is a complete lie. You're not an independent contractor. You can't work for nobody else. They own you exclusively. They tell you when you wrestle, where you'll wrestle. They tell you whether you win or lose. How much more control could they have over you?
That's true.
And yet you're an independent contractor? Well, if that were the case, then I could wrestle for both leagues, couldn't I?
Right, which would never go. They would never.
Which would never fly.
Yep.
And, you know, so it's a big lie that wrestling's been able to perpetrate for over 50, 60 years so that they don't have to pay Social Security and wrestlers get no benefits of being an employee. And it's criminal. And I'd like to, it's a good thing I didn't get elected to the U.S. Senate along the way, because I would have already started a senatorial investigation into it. If I would have been elected a senator, if I would have ran for it, but I never did. Thought about it once or twice, but never did. I don't think I could hack the legislative branch. I'd have to be in the executive branch. But anyway, it's criminal what wrestling and what Vince and all these promoters have gotten away with for over 50 years, 60 years, who knows how long, and they don't pay anything. And you have to pay self-employment tax, which is 15% of your income.
Jeez.
They should be paying half for your Social Security.
When you were pitching the idea of forming a union, were there any other wrestlers who were really receptive to it and wanted to do that?
Well, what happened was simple. It was right before WrestleMania 2. All the publicity was out. It was like 2 weeks before, and I was in a dressing room, and none of the office guys were there at the moment. So I stood up in the dressing room, and I said, guys, now is the time to unionize. All we have to do is refuse to wrestle WrestleMania unless union representation is brought in. I said they have to do it. It's a federal law. I said not only that, but these buildings that we're wrestling in are union run. And all they have to do is say, we won't turn on the lights unless you allow these guys to unionize. I said and then we got to get a hold of the Charlotte people and have them do the same thing on their side, because that was our big rival then, between New York and Charlotte and all that, the whole WCW stuff.
Right.
And I said, if we get them to do it too, I said, all the publicity's out there, because somebody piped up right away, well, we need Hogan. I said, no, we don't. We need Bundy. That's who he's wrestling. Hogan can't wrestle a broomstick.
So Hogan wasn't in the room when you pitched this idea?
Oh, Hogan was there.
Okay.
Absolutely, he was there. And so I made this big pitch, and I told him, now's the time to do it. All the publicity is out. We'll get a ton of press. I said that they can't stop us. It's a federal law that union people will be allowed to come in. I said, all we have to do is stick together on it. Well, we ended that night. I went home and got a phone call the next day from Vince McMahon. And he wanted to know what the hell I was trying to pull and what the hell I was trying to do, with this union crap. And so I was blunt and honest. I said, Vince, it's not to fight you. I said, it's so I can get health care and buy in numbers so we can have retirement. Many of these things that aren't provided for us. And of course, I was leaving then. Right after WrestleMania 2, I got on a plane and was off doing Predator. And so I'm now a member of the Screen Actors Guild. I went off and did Predator. When I came back and renegotiated and came back to Vince, did you know that I had to quit? Vince wasn't going to let me do the film.
Really?
Yeah, and so I said I quit. So I quit. Because I said I can always come back to wrestling. I won't get another chance to co-star with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Are you kidding me?
Right.
I said, I'm going to do the film. Screw you. And off I left. I was gone. But then Vince needed me because he just signed the second year of NBC Saturday Night Main Event, and NBC expected me on the mic. And when I wasn't there for the first one, they went ballistic. And that's why Vince had to meet all my demands, because NBC told him to. It's all being in the right place at the right time and playing your poker hand correctly.
The reason I asked if Hulk Hogan was in the room is because later on during a lawsuit against Vince McMahon, you found out that he was actually the one that that informed him that you were trying to form a union, correct?
Yep. And what happened was I kept it in the back of my mind, and later when I left the WWF, I decided to bring a legal action for the videotape royalties that I always talked about. Why don't I get paid for these? I do in Hollywood. And it was doing that. We had to go out and depose Vince for federal deposition. And, of course, it's a civil case, so you can ask him anything. So I told my attorney the story, and I said, look, if you can work it around, I'd like to know who ratted me, because there was only wrestlers in the room that night, so it had to be one of them. And so my attorney was brilliant. He's asking Vince questions, and he gets to the point. He says, Mr. McMahon, he said, has there ever been a union in wrestling? And Vince goes, no. And my attorney goes, well, has anyone ever talked about it or tried to start one? Vince calmly thought a moment. He said, yeah. He said, I think Jesse Ventura spouted his mouth off about it one time. And, when you're sitting in a deposition, I'm not allowed to talk. I just have to sit there. And but I can consult with my attorney on things. But he said, yeah, I think Jesse Ventura spouted his mouth off about it one time or whatever. And my attorney said, really? He said, well, did you hear Mr. Ventura say this? And Vince said, oh, no, I didn't hear it. My attorney said, well, then how did you know he did? With no hesitation whatsoever, Vince said, well, Hulk Hogan told me.
You had been friends with Hulk Hogan, correct?
Oh, yeah, totally.
So why do you think he did that?
And when I came in the business, the worst thing you could be in the business then was what they called an office stooge. That's a guy who pretends to be one of the boys, but he's always reporting back to the office. You know, that's what went on in the territory days. That's how people would secure their positions and all that with the politics of wrestling. And so the lowest thing you could be in the early days of wrestling was to be labeled an office stooge. And that's what I consider Hogan now. And I understood why, because during the trial, we got all the statistics from WrestleMania 3, the one in Pontiac Silverdome. And I know why Hogan did it, because he was greedy. If there would have been a union, it would have been a fairer pay scale for everyone. WrestleMania 3, Hulk Hogan made more money than all the rest of us combined.
Wow, that's insane.
And that includes Andre, his opponent.
That's crazy when you think of all the names on that card. You had Macho
Oh,
Man,
yeah.
Randy Savage,
He got
Ricky
more
Steamboat,
money than all of us. I saw it. We have the records in the trial. Hogan got more money at WrestleMania 3 than all the rest of us combined.
Wow.
So that's why Hogan didn't want a union. He was being taken care of. You know, and he flushed us all down the toilet because, you know, that's the way people like him are, I think. You know, they don't, that's why Hogan wouldn't make he wouldn't make a good elected official, because he can't separate his own from the public good.